Hey everybody, I'm Greg Soul and welcome to another CIQ demo. Today I'm going to be showing you how to use the Ascender installer to get a system up and operating in your lab environment as quickly as possible. So I'm taking this from the approach of you are, say, maybe a network engineer or a Windows engineer who doesn't have like a tremendous amount of Linux experience. So just looking at our install instructions here on a Git repository, it is Linux heavy, so it may be a little bit unfamiliar to you. So I want to try and get you up and going as quick as possible. So I can tell you that I am using Rocky VMs. I've tested thoroughly on Rocky 8 and 9 and they both work great. I'm just going to do an 8 system because that's the one I happened to reset last. So I'm going to kind of start at the start, and I'm going to be using PuTTY, and that is just an SSH client for Windows. So I've connected into my system, and it is a kind of base Rocky 8 system. I have run updates, so I did a sudo dnf update -y, and that will kind of update all the packages that are on the system, get it kind of up and ready to go. This does have 2 virtual CPUs and 8 gigs of RAM because I'm going to be installing Ledger as well. So that's another awesome feature of the installer, that it will install Ascender, but it will also install Ledger right along with it. So I am logged in as my user. I'm going to do pwd really quick just to show you. Here's my present working directory. It defaults to the home, and this is where I'm going to pull the files for the installer. I'm first going to need to check, do I have Git, a Git client? And so Git is a repository system where you can hold files. I like to think of it as a file cabinet where you can kind of check things in and out. Only thing is, people can make copies of your file cabinet and then push their changes back in. So let's not go too far down that rabbit hole. I want to keep this as quick as possible. But I'm going to check to see if Git is installed, and I will just do a git -- version here, and command not found. That means it's not installed. So what I need to do is sudo, which tells it to escalate privileges. It's kind of like run as administrator on Windows. So I'm going to do sudo dnf install git -y. The -y basically says don't prompt me for anything. Let's see if I've typed that password in correctly. I did. So it's going to pull all the required packages, do a quick install, and then I can test the Git client here momentarily. All right, that was pretty quick. So now we're going to hit up arrow a couple times to get to git -- version again, and now it spits out a version. I'm going to go ahead and clear my screen in between stuff every now and then by just typing clear. That way it kind of keeps the terminal a little bit nicer. Now I need to do what's called a git clone. So I'm going to pull all those files in. So here in my browser is our install directory, which got all of our great files right here. So what I can do is I can just copy from the kind of the URL there, and I can use that in the git clone command, or I can click on code and it gives me different options right here. HTTPS, I'm just going to hit the copy right there. I'm going to go back to my terminal window. And from this directory, remember it's home and my username, gsoul. I'm going to type git clone, and then I'm going to paste in by just right-clicking in PuTTY and hit enter. And now it went and pulled the files. It really is that quick and simple. I'll do an ls, which is how you list the directory. And I can see the installer, the Ascender install directory is there now. So I'm going to cd into it, cd for change directory, Ascender install. And then here are all my files. And so on the command line, I can edit these with programs like VI or Nano. For people just getting started, that can be a little bit difficult. I'm pretty familiar with it because I've had to bang my head against it enough times. But let me show you a little tool for Windows that's free called WinSCP. I'm using this to connect into my host. So I've pulled the files. Here's my home directory. You can see right there. I'm going to do a refresh because I had added those files. So I'm going to go into Ascender install, and we're concentrating on 2 specific files in here that we need to configure. One is the default config. This is going to be the kube config file for Kubernetes. You really, at this point, which is really cool, you don't even have to know that much about it. So really Kubernetes, it's going to be running K3, which is kind of a lightweight Kubernetes. It's going to install that on my virtual machine, right on my Rocky 8 machine. It's going to add all of the containers for Ascender and Ledger and all that good stuff. And it's going to stand it all up and have it ready to go. So let's start with inventory. This is how we're actually going to connect to the host. And by default, at least as per now, we have it so that you don't have to make any modifications. It's assuming you're going to be installing all of this on the same server that you have the files on, right? Really, this has the ability to connect to a remote host and install the files there. And we're going to be showing you at a later date how to do that in another video. But this one, remember, it's just going to be kind of all contained in one single package. So by default, right out of the box, we don't have to make any modifications, right? So it's going to be localhost. This is the thing that's going to be running all the execution that's connecting into the other boxes, but honestly it's connecting into itself, so we're going to have it set as connection equals local. You can see there's some stuff commented out right here. If I'm going to be installing in other systems, right, you can uncomment those and make your modifications there. But again, all on the same box: Ascender host, Ansible host, local host, right? It's connection local, so all that's pre-configured, ready to go. I just wanted to point it out just in case you do decide to install it somewhere else. Now let's look at the default config. This we actually will have to make modifications on. So on this one, it is really asking us to fill in the blanks for all the different configuration methods. So we are installing it on K3s, right? So it's going to actually put it in kind of lightweight Kubernetes. We talked about that. So something important here is we do have to put in a host name for Ascender right here. And I have created just some bogus ones here in my DNS settings. So this one is Ascender test8.com, not a real URL. You can try and go to it, doesn't do anything. Here are some options you're probably going to want to fill out. Usually I like to leave the admin user as admin, but you're going to want to change this admin password to something unique, right? Something that's probably hard to guess. You're probably going to want to also come through and change database password information, various things like that, right? Update passwords. Come in here and update passwords, and kind of the easy to use install guide, which should be accompanying a blog post soon, if not already. We'll point out all those little blanks that you want to fill in to change those things. All right, if you want to install Ledger as well, it is there by default. So you can see it says true. So it will install Ledger, and Bob's your uncle, you're done. If you don't want it to install that, you can set this to false and it will skip just that install process. You don't have to worry about anything that says Ledger underscore, right? Because it's only Ledger specific information. But by default, we've got it Ledger true. So I'm going to go ahead and go with that. And I have, again, made up kind of a bogus DNS name, Ledger test8.com, right? Because this is all my Rocky 8 stuff. And I can show you really quick here. I run what's called MikroTik here at my house for my router, and I can create static DNS entries for various things. And so here, just for Ascender test 8, I've created a static entry that points to the IP address of that host, right? Same with Ledger test 8. Now I could manage the host file on my machine itself, which if you are familiar with Linux, you're probably familiar with a host file making basically local DNS entries in there. The Windows host has that as well, and you can edit that host file, because ultimately when we're connecting into Ascender or Ledger, it's going to use domain name to know which Kubernetes container, right, that's running, say, Ascender or Ledger, to route the traffic to. So we have to have some kind of domain name that actually resolves in there. So you could do that via your DNS, via your host file. Also, you have the option of actually putting it in a public routable DNS. That works just as well. But for me, I'm just doing it in a dirty little lab environment, so I'm going to assume you don't have that. So we have got our Ledger host name in there as well. Let's see, Ledger image, all of that stuff is good. I can, again, you're going to want to change passwords and all this stuff, right? I'm just leaving all this default, right? Database password, all that stuff you're going to want to actually make secure. So I am going to be connecting to this thing unsecured, no certificates, right? So I'm not using HTTPS. You could actually create the cert file and the key, place those in the installer path, and it will apply all of those things. But for now, again, I'm just trying to get this thing up and running as fast as possible. So kube install, if you are installing it via K3 on the local machine and it's not already there, you want to set this value to true, right? So this will tell it to, hey, go ahead and actually install the server as well. Master node IP, It needs to be 127.0.0.1, which is localhost, so it's running on the local machine here. So that is exactly how I want to use it. Use etc. host files. So again, we talked about if you have a public DNS, then you can create like a fully qualified domain name in your DNS entry. Use that here. It will resolve correctly. You'll want to set this to false. But in our case, we are just using kind of a host file. And if I set this to true, it will actually take those domain names that I added up above and it'll add it to the host file automatically for you. So you want to leave that as true as well. After that, I can click save, and I've modified that file on my Linux server, right? Without having to use kind of the command line tools that are a little bit more difficult. Now that I'm done with that, I have my cube config file done, my inventory. I didn't actually have to make any modifications. And now it's time to run the installer. I'm going to type sudo again, // and that's just a Linux way of saying, hey, it's in this folder that I'm in now, right? Because I cd'd into the Ascender install. And I will type setup and I'll hit tab because it does auto completion for you. I'll run that. It's going to prompt me for my password and it will start installing. And through the magic of editing, I'll be back momentarily when it's complete. All right, so that install process, start to finish, I'm looking at my clock down here, it took about 16 minutes. And that is with my system with very limited resources, right? Kind of just the bare minimum. I think for any of you that are installing Ascender, you're probably familiar with Ansible itself. And guess what? Looking at the output from our installer here, you can tell that it's actually using Ansible to install it, which is kind of meta. I sort of like that here. But at the end of all of it, you should see Ascender successfully set up. There are a couple of tasks in there that do take a little bit of time, and they have warnings in those lines that say could take up to 5 minutes, could take up to 10 minutes, could take up to 20 minutes on some of them. So bear those warnings in mind. Don't worry about it. It's going to be okay. Just let the installer run. So now that it is complete, let me pop back over to my browser and let me check. So I put in sendertest8.com. Let me reload that. All right, that one came up successfully. And then I did ledgertest8.com and that one came up successfully. All right, should still have the default username and password in there. Let's see. And there you have it. Ascender and Ledger stood up running in less than 20 minutes. I love going through this process because it genuinely is surprising at how quick it can stand a system up and have you working kind of 0 to 60 in less than 20 minutes. Now, if you have any questions or comments about anything you saw, please feel free to reach out. If you are interested in support for Ascender and Ledger, we'd be happy to talk to you. If you are tired of counting nodes, feel free to reach out to us. If you have any tweaks or tunes, or there are any cloud providers that we don't already have added, which we are rapidly adding more cloud providers all the time, please feel free to reach out, or if you can contribute code. We're always happy to see it. So thank you, and we'll see you next time. Bye.